Hi everyone, I want to show you another game. Um, this one's from 1996 in New York. This game is between then, at the time, international master Maurice Ashley, rated 2460, versus GM Michael Adams from England. The reason why I'm showing you this game is because it illustrates very well uh, the strength and weakness of pawns in the center of the board, and when they are weak and when they are strong. So I'm gonna run this game is kind of long, so I'm gonna go through it quickly. So Maurice started off with D4, and again, this is before Maurice actually became a grandmaster. But at this time, he's basically coming into his what I would say like his peak. It's getting stronger and stronger, and if you look at his games, he's starting to defeat, these grandmasters like Shabalov, and holding strong grandmasters to draws and such like that. So not like he's showing that you know, the international master is uh, is a deserved title, but he belongs with the in the ranks of GMs. So here's one of those games. New York 1996. So D4, knight f6, C4, E6. Michael Adams plays his beloved Nimzo Indian. Knight C3, Bishop B4, Nimzo Indian, E3. This is the Rubinstein variation. The idea is basically to play knight E2, knight G E2, then play a move like A3 with the idea of just simply avoiding double pawns at the exchange of the bishop on C3, and make white give black give up the bishop pair for nothing. B6, knight G E2, and again this is one of Nimzovich's idea. Notice how black has chosen to forego the actual occupation of the center with pawns. Instead, he uses his pieces to influence and control those squares. So, for instance, the bishop pins the knight to the king on E1, deleting the knight's influence on E4. So this knight controls E4. What do I mean by control? If white was to play E4 here, black can just capture the pawn without penalty. Furthermore, this move B6 indicates move bishop B7 coming again, influencing E4 D5 square with the pieces without any occupation of the pawns. Now this was the big debate in the early 1900s, the chess revolution that took place between Nimzovich and Alekhine and Tarish and all these new players that were well, not Tarish was a representative of the old guard, but the new players like Reddy and Nimzovich, the younger players, Alekhine, that were trying these new openings out and saying, hey, we don't have to put two pawns on E4 and D4 to dominate the game, but we can use our pieces. Of course, now this is all water traveled under the bridge. So Adams jumps in with knight E4 again, showing who controls the square. E4, F3, knight takes C3, and I was gonna say bishop takes C3, B takes C3, and of course, completely logical is knight takes C3. After all, why put your knight there? But there are other possibilities for the knight. So B takes C3, and most of all, black will lose a tempo and just simply retreating his bishop. Now in turn, he does have the bishop here. Meanwhile, white has an intimidating looking center, a mobile pawn center. And this is really important, one of the most important concepts when it comes to understanding about putting pawns in the center. The pawns have to be mobile. In other words, once they become fixed and rigid, ossified if you will, they can be attacked. And one of the principles that Nimzovich talks about is first you hinder the pawns, right? You slow them down, then you fix them or blockade. He talks a lot about blockade, and then you destroy them. As long as they're mobile, you can't destroy them because they can move. Like you attack them on E4, it goes to E5, or you attack it on D4, it moves to D5. So you have to fix the pawns first. So if you look at this structure right here, white's pawns are very menacing, and you can see the potential that they have. Nimzovich also talks about the lust to expand with the pawns, right? They want to move up the board. They want to go to E4, E5, F4, F5, D5. They want to just, like zombies, just take over the black side of the board. So it's up to black to find a way to first slow down, hinder these pawns, freeze them, and attack and break down. So let's look at what happened here. So Maurice plays knight G3, H5 from Michael Adams, and the idea is basically to knock this knight off the G3 square. Also allows this rook to be able to develop along this rank later on. Black has to be very careful here because the center can become dangerous. So black has to start his counterplay immediately. Bishop D3, H4, knight E4, just hopping into the center. Again, keep note of white's intimidating looking center. Adams plays knight C6, very provocative looking move. But again, if, for instance, if D5, it will be a mistake. The knight E5. Amateur might play D5. Maurice just castles. Now here H3 is possible, probing the queen side and provoking G3, further weakness on the queen side. Michael Adams plays bishop A6. One of the themes here in these type of openings too is the bishop goes from bishop B7 to A6, and the main idea behind knight C6 and bishop A6 is eventually play the knight here to A5, where it's difficult to protect this pawn. Right, this is almost transposed into like a Samish variation now of the Nimzo Indian defense. So again, we're gonna see black try to slow down. Remember, slow down, freeze, and then destroy the white center. White, on the other hand, wants to strive to keep his central forces moving, mobile. Plays F4, and we already know where that F pawn is going, don't we? F4, F5, open up the position. There's the attack on the C4 pawn. Plays F5. This is a dynamic approach. Players sometimes will try to play queen moves like queen E2 and stuff like that to hold on to the pawn, but this attack is more. This attack is more important nowadays than just trying to hold on to some pawn on the queen side of the board. So Maurice plays F5. E takes F5. Rook takes F5. Okay. G6. And now Adams has to be very careful. F file is open behind the development, but the position is still relatively closed for the most part. And this is what saves Adams' position, so to speak. Just the fact that it's still relatively closed. Castle's king side. Knight D2. So he decides, okay, now's the time to hop back and protect this pawn. Now this pawn is falls under scrutiny because again it's immobilized. It can't really move. If it goes up here, then it gets captured, and then you end up with the C pawns doubled up. And that's what creates the weakness when it becomes frozen. So d5. So now, why does Adams attack the weakness? Because it's completely immobilized. After knight d2, this bishop is now cut off from the protection from the queen on d1. So therefore, any kind of capture would allow bishop takes d3. So now white faces a further dilemma. How to protect this pawn once again. Well, now he has to play queen e2. And notice how these attacks take place after the center has been immobilized. Remember how massive and intimidating that center looked? F5 was played, right? F4, F5 was played. And look how Adams just systematically chips away at the center. So now queen e2 happened. Knight takes c4. There's another piece of the center. Knight takes c4. Bishop takes c4. Bishop takes c4. D takes c4. Queen takes c4. A lot of exchanges. Excuse me. A lot of exchanges on c4 and c5. So you might be saying, wait a minute. The center seems like it's not immobile here. Well, he can just play d5, right? Which is accurate. d5 can be played here. However, although the center is mobile there, bishop d6 can quickly make the center immobile. He's quickly able to blockade that, and white has to be very careful about that. That's one move that can be played. Then there's a tactical moves like b5. Now what? Queen b3, right? Attacking this. And I think after c4, queen takes b5, right? Just sacrificing the pawn, rook c8. It'd be hard for white to hold on to this pawn for any period of time. The move rook c5 is threatened imminently. So for instance, I don't know, let's say rook d1. First we can just throw in a move like h3 to rip up this king side. So for instance, g takes, attacking the e3 pawn. Right, so could throw that in there. Moves like rook c5 are possible. And those are just samples. Sample lines to show you that it is not hard, or it's not easy rather, to maintain a large center of pawns. It's a big responsibility. In theory, it looks great to have these pawns and just marching up the board and steamroll your opponent. But once they get bogged down in the mud, so to speak, they become targets. You know, just think of it like this. Say you have like a big army. You know, you have a big army, and matter of fact, in the Book of Five Rings by um, oh man, what's it, Musashi, right? Miyamoto. In the Book of Five Rings, he says that large armies, right? He said that with a single swordsman, it's easy to change direction, right? You could change the, as soon as you think about a move, you can make the move. You know, like if you're running through the woods and you want to just dive into the water real quick and hide out, or dig a hole in the ground, hide out. It's easy for one soldier to, individual unit to make moves. But it's hard for a large army. Say you have a big regiment, 10,000 guys, and you come under attack. It's hard to get out the way. It's hard to move because you got to get all of those people organized and out of the way. It's easy to see them coming. It's easy to prepare because of the sheer magnitude and numbers. And it's kind of the same with when you have these big pawn centers that, yes, they're very strong and powerful, but once they get bogged down and come under siege, it's hard to maintain them. Let's continue. So after c5, e4. Now, if you know anything about the center, once e4 is played, the d4 becomes a little weaker. Why? Because the pawn on c3 and the pawn on e3 is supporting this pawn right here on d4. But this bishop has to come out someday, right? He can't come out here because of the c5 pawn. Here he would be behind 2 pawns. So he wants to get this bishop out somehow, possibly to go here and harass this rook. But in doing so, he advances and c takes d4, c takes d4, and then now the center, right, gets a little smaller, right? Now he has these 2 pawns in the center, right? No longer having the big 4-pawn center. Now he has 2 pawns in the center. And the same rules apply. If Maurice can somehow turn these into mobile runners, then this will become a great asset. You know, sometimes you can push these all the way up to a queen, as we've seen Vladimir Kramnik do many times with isolated pawns. But if they get bogged down, then they become a liability. Let's see what happens. So bishop g5. So Adams decides to use a tempo to trade off bishops. He plays bishop g5. He wants to get rid of the bishops. Now, I think that move is a mistake because it just doesn't seem right to play bishop e7, bishop g5, and then say bishop c1 for, you know, to lose, to spend all this time on a piece that's not even developed yet. So after bishop g5, I think Maurice should have simply played bishop takes g5 there. Queen takes g5, then use the time gain to move off the c file with the queen, because there's no doubt that one of these rooks is probably going to end up on the c file. So you might as well get the queen out of there, maybe playing a move like queen b3 or queen d3, supporting the pawn advance, the potential pawn advances later. So I would give this move by Adams like some kind of funny mark to it, like the exclam with the question mark, because that move just doesn't look right. Instead, I would try to liquidate this move, liquidate this pawn, and play a move like h3 or something, or even an obvious looking move like rook c8. You know, why not harass right now? For instance, go like this, develop for free, and say queen d3, and then bishop f6 with pressure here. Say bishop b2, and then again throw that in there. Those kind of moves are always good to throw in there. Again, he can't take with the queen because of the e4 pawn. He could play a move like that, which creates a long-term worry of getting checkmated here on g2. Or he can play g takes h3, again with the king side ripped open. So I would say rook c8 here. So instead, bishop g5 was played, and Maurice played queen d3, which to me was a good move because, again, he makes a practical move. He knows a rook is coming to the c file, so why not get out of the way? And he doesn't waste time moving the bishop. He knows that black has wasted a couple of tempi on it, so he's like, whatever. There it is, rook c8. And now Maurice plays a natural move and plays bishop a3. Only thing I could say about bishop a3 is that it kind of forces this rook to go somewhere where it wants to go, and that's in direct opposition to these central pawns. So he avoids the exchange, but it doesn't do anything. It's kind of like playing e4. It's kind of like opening the game with e4, e5, playing knight f3, and then opponent plays knight c6. Like, yes, you are attacking the e5 pawn after knight f3, but knight c6 is a move that he wants to do anyway. So it's kind of like the same principle. Yes, bishop a3 is a good move. You're putting the bishop on the diagonal, but rook e8 is a move that he wants to do anyway. Like, you're forcing him to develop. And this is why Adams should have played rook e8 instead of using another tempi to play bishop e7. See, and again, at this point, Maurice can push. Remember, mobile pawns, he can push here. He can play d5. And then the battle will continue. Say bishop takes a3, queen takes a3. Um, say queen e8, rook e1, rook c5. You notice it's all about the mobility. So for instance, black wants to play e5, but he has to worry about the d5 pawn. So d6, queen e6, and it's just a battle. Rook d2. So it's kind of like one of those things. Will the pawns be mobile or immobile? Rook e5, and we see, and again, this is just a sample line, just showing you the ideas and what goes into this. The pawn's gonna be mobile or immobile. If they're immobile, you lose them. If they're mobile, then you're gonna win the day with the pawns. So just having pawns in the center or having a big center means nothing. It's what can you do with them? Again, bishop e7. We're back to the game, by the way. Bishop b2. So Maurice didn't trade here. Bishop b2, and he probably has ideas of mate. He have all these dark squares. He's keeping his options open, and I prefer white here. Bishop f6, rook af1, bishop g7, king h1. Maurice being real cautious here. Rook c7, rook f4, queen c8, and Maurice takes his time to push. Plays e5. Now he could have just took this pawn. Rook takes c4. That would have been interesting. And Adams probably play a move like rook d8 here. It's very interesting because this rook might seem a little out of place here. And then let's see, if the rook comes back, h4, then so after rook h4, queen e6, for example, a3, and again these are sample lines. Notice the opposition again with the rook on d8, queen on d3. Black could play a slick move like bishop e5. Now I'm not saying black is winning or anything like that. The game is still up for grabs, but it just shows you the dynamic possibilities that take place when you're fighting against a mobile center. You have to be creative. You can't allow the center, and then of course you would just take that. You can't allow the center to become a monster. It has the seeds of becoming a monster, but you can't let it get to that. Back to the game. Maurice plays the move 29 e5. He says, hey, I'm going to move this center up. And you're going to see the downside of him having this bishop here in a few moves. And he probably should have traded it off a long time ago. So e4, rook c2, and black is organizing his counterplay against the white king side, utilizing this open C file here and penetrating, attacking an unprotected piece. Maurice offers a trade of pieces, which in turn, this benefits black in my opinion, because he was tied to the protection of the f7 pawn, and now his rook is freed up again. Now he has a simple threat, to take here. Queen b3. And queen e6. Right? Now, how many of you would play queen takes e6 here? Right? A lot of you probably play that move. Queen e6, which leads to total demobilization of the white center. How would you get this pawn? How would you do anything with these pawns? These pawns would be sitting ducks. Completely blockaded. Okay? So, queen e6. And remember what I told you. White pawns blockaded. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. They're in the center. They're just big. They're targets in the center, right? They're not controlling nothing. They're not, they're worthless right now. There's no knight to put, in these outposts. So if you could have pieces up here and stuff, it'd be different. But here, they're just blockaded. H3, queen takes, A takes B3, and now Maurice has to worry about these two to one majority on the queen side. Bishop H6. See, now the bishop is relieved of the pressure of having to stay on the dark squares because this pawn can't move. It just get captured. Again, these pawns are demobilized. Rook F3. Bishop G5. So it protects his weakness here. King G1 starts the race for the center. It's easy. Where do you put the king here? You want the king. You want this king here. If you could wave a magic wand, you would like the king here and here. Right, putting pressure on these squares. Of course, this has to, black has his own weaknesses to protect. But if you could, you would want the king here. So in this case, for practical purposes, perhaps right here. Let's see how the game unfolded. King F8. King F2. King E7. King E2. F5. And it's interesting how Michael Adams decides to alleviate himself of the weakness by just playing F5 here. Now it's a dangerous move because white does not have to capture en passant. He does in the game. Maurice played E takes F6, which contributed to the destruction of his own center. And now he has to be very careful. Right? That's why I said this game is very instructive about pawn centers. Because he could have not taken en passant and say play something else. For instance, King D3. And kept this idea going, with the idea of pushing. But then he probably seen this King E6 again with the pawns blockaded. How would he be able to make progress? Right? And now with the pawn on F5, he will be able to go here soon. Play could have continued B4. And there's many different ways to go here. Rook C8 is possible. But still, this would have been problematic. Black would have had to keep an eye over in this area. Back to the game. Maurice took en passant with E takes F6. And he basically gave up, pursuing this idea of the huge center. Now I want you to contrast. We're gonna move 39 right here. Black just moved. I want you to contrast the picture of the center here, and think about how the center looks now, as opposed. All right, and I want you to contrast what you just saw with this position. This is at move 12, and Maurice actually had just played F4. Look at this center. Right, look at the white center. Pawns on C4, right? C3, D4, E3, F4. Bishop on D3, knight on C4, right? Looks mighty. And now back to the position. We see there's one lone pawn, isolated, weakling in the center, right? So we say that black has proved this point, right? This hypermodern strategy, and of course, errors were made on both sides, but this game is a good example. Blockade, and even to the end, right? We keep going. Bishop takes F6, King D3, and even Bishop G7. This play is not the most accurate move. King E4, right? Why King E4 is Maurice still wants to play to be able to expand, right? This pawn wants to become a queen. That's like his goal, his dreams and aspirations. Again, one of the problems here, as I alluded to earlier, this bishop on b2 now is subject to being captured if a move like d5 is played. Bishop f6. So he gets off the diagonal. Bishop a3. King f7. d5. And now it's real problematic now that the pawn is in front of the king. One general idea to try to remember is you want the king to be the leader. I mean, it's more detailed than that, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Like, maybe if I start doing endgame videos, I'll explain those things in detail. But generally, you want the king to be the leader. Once you have this pawn in front of the king like that, usually that pawn isn't going anywhere. That's the case right here. Rook e8, check. King d3. And this bishop exacerbates the situation because king can't even cut over this way because of the bishop blocking the diagonal. So king d3, rook e5. You see how the piece gets attacked. It's interesting. a6. Real simple move is rook e2 here, and allowing this to take place. King b5 and picking up. But it's understandable why Adams played a6 to keep the king out of here. However, Maurice missed a powerful move here. That move is d6. I'm sorry. d6. And again, this alludes to the fact that this pawn wants to expand. Why is d6 so powerful? Now, this move is threatened. So let's say, for instance, trying to find some type of like in between move here. Okay, for instance, let's go here. Let's say rook e2, right? Adam says I'm gonna attack this pawn. Then simply d7, and then you'll say, well, isn't the bishop guarding this, right? d8. No, it's not, because the rook is pinning. And this is why you have to be very careful when it comes to the central pawns, because like I said, you have to blockade them and stop them and demobilize them for real, because what will happen is you'll think you have them stopped, as Michael Adams did right here, right? Thinks everything's good. He thinks that pawn can't go anywhere, and next thing you know, d6, and white is winning here. Believe it or not, white is actually winning here. This is very difficult. You know what? I'll take that back, because anything can happen. But white, I can't see how black stops the pawn, basically. I mean, for instance, if he goes king e6, then you just sacrifice. Rook takes f6. That draws the king away, and then you play d7. I challenge if you can find a defense that will actually hold here for black. I mean, it might be, but if you want to research yourself from this position, in the actual game, Maurice played bishop b2, right? But I'm saying that d6 is almost decisive here. Let's look at bishop b5. B5 check. And now you just switch gears and you play this move, king b4. What's the idea behind king b4? Well, it's a new weakness now. It's called a6, and he's simply just gonna go ahead. So now rook d5, getting behind the pawn, right? Bishop b2, right? Again, remember, this guy's pinned. Rook d6, and now it's like a zugzwang position. So now the king is here attacking. This is pinned. So now what? Say G5, and now you're just gonna simply take 2 times here. So for instance, you play B4, right? So you squeeze, and that's another principle too about squeezing as much as you can out of these Uggs wings. I'm not gonna get into that either. Um, Rook takes, and I don't know, F5. Yeah, go here. And you take this pawn. Why do I choose to advance the G pawn? Because the king is on the G file, and the queen will check, for instance. And this is very complicated, but white should win this game. So again, this is a rich endgame at the D6, and like I said, it just shows you the delicate matter of how the pawns are to be handled in the center. Again, remember, if you're the possessor of the big center, right? It's not enough just to have a big center. Don't just get a big center and then rest on your laurels. Say to yourself, I have to keep this center moving, right? No matter what. And how do you keep that moving? You have to make sure that you either A, drive away the defenders, right, of those squares that you need, right, that are in front of the pawns, right? It's like, just think of war analogies. Your army is trying to move and take territory. So you have to control the next town, so to speak, right? Before you can move your troops in and set up base, you have to win that next town that's in front, right? You can't just bring your army into town and then they'll fall under all kind of sniper and enemy fire, right? You have to, first of all, you keep your main part of your army back, and maybe you send the bombers first and decimate that town, and then you move your troops in. So it's the same way with these squares. Look at the squares as like the next town. So you want those pawns to move forward, so you got to take over the squares that's in front of those pawns, right? And how do you control those squares? Is you drive away the defenders. You either capture them or you drive them to inferior positions. You create diversions on other parts of the board. Like sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn somewhere which would drive a piece away. You have to be creative. So here, all right. So I'm gonna stand out on the limb and say D6 is winning for Maurice Ashley in this position, right? So what he played during the game is Bishop B2, and it's like a normal looking move because of the pin aspect. Luckily for Adams, he has this move, Rook takes F5. Excuse me, Rook F5. Only move. Rook takes, G takes, and now Bishop C1. King E8, Bishop E3, Bishop D8, and everything hangs on a thread. D6. But now there's the full blockade of the pawn on D6. King D5, A5, and now the problem for white is that there's a 2-to-1 queenside majority for Adams to push. Bishop D2, and we see Maurice trying to blockade, but B5 is possible because this pawn, bishop on D8, protects the pawn on A5. King C5, A4, and everything is just in time, so he liquidates. And now this king is driven away from the protection of the pawn on D6 to stop the passed pawn on A4. Now say bye to the once mighty center. And Adams' king winds up in the center of the board. in a better position, but it's just not enough to be able to win the game. And the players agreed to a draw. So to me, this was a great battle, great educational battle. I hope you learned a lot out of about the center. I know it took um, a couple of minutes to explain, but this game is definitely worth your study time. So from this position right here, where you see White's mighty center to Black being in the center, it's very very instructive. A lot of good moves along the way. So like I said, hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe. Remember, the move that I say is winning, 46 D6 right there. Put an exclamation mark against that. There might be some obscure drawing lines, but like I said, I'm just going out on a limb. So that game again was Maurice Ashley, rated 2460 versus Grandmaster, or I am Maurice Ashley, rated 2460 versus Grandmaster Michael Adams, 2660 in New York City, 1996. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you later.